Welcome to our Good Friday service. This is when we descend into the darkness of the shadow of the cross and walk with Christ to his crucifixion. It is often in our darkest moments when we feel most alone. These are times indeed when it is so easy to feel alone and isolated, to be in the midst of our suffering and loneliness, our sadness and grief, our panic and worry and uncertainty. This month has felt like one long Good Friday, but we come here tonight knowing that even in the midst of our darkest moments, Christ is there with us, suffering alongside us. Tonight, we worship, we walk with Christ, and we hold out for the possibility of some hope in the end. Join me now for the call to worship. The words will appear on your screen. On this night, we are issued an invitation by Christ, an invitation to come closer, to follow him to the cross.
The road is thorny and stony. The path is ugly and hard. It is an invitation to resist turning away, to resist closing our eyes.
The sights are horrifying, but we will bravely look.
The sounds are haunting, but we will dare to listen.
Jesus was kind, compassionate, and peaceful,
but he was also filled with righteous anger when he saw injustice, oppression, and abuse. In the temple, he saw corruption and exploitation of the poor. He flipped tables and disrupted the exchange of money in a sacred place. In a loud voice, he said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up."
Join in the opening hymn. The words will be on your screen. Alas, and did my Savior bleed? Read along with me on your screens, Mark chapter 14, verses 53 to 64. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes were assembled. Peter had followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards, warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many gave false testimony against him, and their testimony did not agree. Some stood up and gave false testimony against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands.' But even on this point their testimony did not agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, 'Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?' But he was silent and did not answer. Again, the high priest asked him, 'Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?' Jesus said, 'I am.' and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "Why do we still need witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?" All of them condemned him as deserving death. Some began to spit on him, to blindfold him, and to strike him, saying to him, "Prophesy." The guards also took him over and beat him.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces, bright and early for the daily races, going nowhere, going nowhere. I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world. Mad world.
Our story continues. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she stared at him and said, "You also were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." But he denied it, saying, "I do not know or understand what you're talking about." And he went out into the forecourt. Then the cock crowed. And the servant girl, on seeing him, began again to say by the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. Then after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know this man you are talking about." At that moment, the cock crowed for the second time. And Peter remembered that Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept.
And only kindness matters. In the end, only kindness matters. I will get down on my knees and I will pray. I will get down on my knees and I will pray, 'cause these are God's hands.
As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and the scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "You say so." Then the chief priests accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. Sing with us, "What wondrous love is this?"
What wondrous love is this, O my soul, O my soul? What wondrous love is this, O my soul? What wondrous love is this, that Christ should come in bliss to bear the heavy cross for my soul, to bear the heavy cross for my soul. love is this, that Christ should come to bear the heavy cross for my soul, to my soul, the heavy cross for my soul.
Now, a man called Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he answered them, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas instead. Pilate spoke to them again, "Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call King of the Jews?" They shouted back, "Crucify him." Pilate asked them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified.
This is my winter song to you. The storm is coming soon. It rolls in from the sea. My voice a beacon in the night. My words will be a light to carry you to me. His love alive, his love alive, his love. This is my winter song. December never felt so wrong, 'cause you're not where you belong, inside my arms.
Then the soldiers led Jesus into the courtyard of the palace, that is, the governor's headquarters, and they called together the whole cohort. And they clothed him in a purple cloak, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on him. And they began saluting him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They struck his head with a reed, spat upon him, and knelt down in homage to him. After mocking him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him.
All this pain, I wonder if I'll ever find my way. I wonder if my life could You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us.
It was 9:00 in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified two bandits, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests, along with their scribes, were also mocking him among themselves and saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now so that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also taunted him, When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the temple broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Many women were there watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. Join us in singing verse 1, "Ah, Holy Jesus."
Holy Jesus, how have you offended that mortal judgment as on you descended? Life was derided, by your own rejected, almost afflicted.
I don't know about all of you out there, but in these last few weeks, my mind has gone to some pretty dark places. It hasn't stayed there, of course, and many of you have been instrumental in reminding me of so many joyful elements that are still present in our new reality. Delightful, beautiful light has broken into the darkness and shone brightly. I have been reminded numerous times that people in general are so much better than we give ourselves credit for. Good deeds abound. Kind gestures are endless. I have seen so many of you step up and think of creative ways to offer your gifts and talents and ideas to this community in the midst of chaos and loneliness and fear. But like any Lenten journey, though this one undoubtedly more so than others, there have been moments where I have allowed myself to acknowledge the deep darkness that is also real in our world. The racist undertones of how some talk about the pandemic, the instinct to stockpile supplies and hoard food. Perhaps most disturbing of all, the threats of violence I have seen on social media, the flaunting of weapons and ammunition, and refusal to comply with health safety measures. In response to one representative's plea to seemingly healthy people who could be carrying the virus on Twitter, she wrote, "Please stop crowding bars, restaurants, and public spaces right now." And one young woman tweeted back, "This is America, and I'll do what I want." Really? Do we have so little regard for one another that simple measures which could save thousands of lives are easily brushed aside as too inconvenient for our individual reckless desires? Is that what our country is about? Good Friday is a day to remember that our individual actions can have widespread effects, and that swings both positive and negative. It is easy to remember this part of Jesus' story, the ugliest, the cruelest, the most violent part, and think, oh, the whole world is responsible in its brokenness. Or at least some ancient people who were part of some corrupt system, that's who killed Jesus. In any case, it has very little to do with you or with me or what is happening in our world today. It is easy to come to Good Friday and go through the motions as if we are only remembering something that happened long, long ago. But if we break the story down, we can see that the path to the cross is paved by individuals who chose to reject Jesus and his teachings. It was one of his own disciples who betrayed him in the garden. It was his closest friend who denied knowing him 3 times. It was a few guards who humiliated him. It was a few religious leaders who falsely accused him and testified against him. It was one political figure who sentenced him. It was a group who called for his capital punishment. We don't know all of their names, but we know some. We don't know what they looked like, but we can imagine that they looked ordinary. They had families and jobs and hopes and dreams and ambitions and flaws and bad habits. They, in all likelihood, looked very much like us. And each person in the Passion story makes a critical choice which allows the story to unfold the way that it does, to betray or to remain loyal. Betray. To deny or admit acquaintance. Deny. To humiliate and harm or to treat with dignity. Humiliate and harm. We can blame those ancient characters and say, we would have chosen differently. We would have done the right thing. But I see the headlines and the photos and the social media posts, and I think we are lying to ourselves. We just as often choose darkness as we choose light. We are just as ready to choose violence as we are to choose peace. We are just as capable of choosing hate as we are of choosing love. Betraying, denying, humiliating, harming, accusing. These are not simply actions of ancient people in an ancient story. They are our actions too. We do them to one another in ways great and small, perhaps more frequently than we even realize. Our Lenten sermon series has been 3-day flip, Stories of Restoration. But on Good Friday, there is no restoration, only demolition. There is no renewal, only deconstruction. Jesus' body, the temple he spoke of, is now torn down and broken, just as he predicted. And it is still torn apart and broken each time we choose betrayal and denial and violence. I sometimes worry about the world we are shaping for our children, especially when they see us behave in such destructive ways toward one another. What lessons are they learning when they see strangers fighting over hand sanitizer and frozen meals? What must they be thinking when they hear us talk about the possible political motives behind a pandemic or the monetizing of a global crisis? What legacy are we leaving them when we allow xenophobic comments to be broadcast on our televisions by our nation's most powerful leader? What choices have we made collectively to get where we are today? In answer to that question on this Good Friday, I will share a favorite poem of mine, Good Bones by Maggie Smith. Life is short, though I keep this from my children. Life is short, and I've shortened mine in 1,000 delicious, ill-advised ways. 1,000 deliciously ill-advised ways I'll keep from my children. The world is at least 50% terrible, and that's a conservative estimate, though I keep this from my children. For every bird, there is a stone thrown at a bird. For every loved child, there is a child broken, bagged, and sunk in a lake. Life is short, and the world is at least half terrible, and for every kind stranger, there is one who would break you, though I keep this from my children. I'm trying to sell them the world, and any decent realtor walking you through a real shithole chirps on about good bones. This place could be beautiful, right? You could make this place beautiful. Jesus said, "You did not choose me, but I chose you." Maybe in 3 days, he will rise again. And if he does, maybe we will as well. Amen.